So today we're celebrating mothers, and there's many mothers who have passed on. Many of us are fortunate enough to still have our mothers present on the planet. Some of us maybe weren't raised by our biological mothers, but there was someone somewhere in our life that provided that mother energy, that nurturing energy for us. And so I just want to broaden the scope from just biological mothers to that mothering, nurturing energy that's been so present for us. And if this tends to be a painful day, because some of us did not have ideal relationships with our mothers. You know, sometimes the relationships have been a little bit problematic, and I know with my daughter sitting right there, we've certainly had our stuff over the years. And I just commend you for being able to be present, whatever your relationship with your mother was, and support the energy of the day and the energy of the mother. So I really do feel extraordinarily blessed to have my daughter sitting here today and to be sharing her music with us, because it's really the first Mother's Day in years that we've been together. And it's actually the first Mother's Day in years that we've been in the same state on Mother's Day. So what I remember, because this was all seeming so familiar to me, is that in the year that she was born, I was thinking, maybe my daughter's going to be born on Mother's Day, because tomorrow is actually Jessica's birthday. And this is the exact format of the time period of her birth. You know, it was Mother's Day. I was anticipating that she was born the next day. So it doesn't happen that regularly. I look back at the calendar, and it's kind of a rare occurrence. So I like the way the moons have lined up in this. But one of the things that I see in my daughter is that she's just got this gift of a voice that from the time that she was really little, I just kind of marveled at the mystery that would place this voice in this little girl, you know, this ear for music in this little girl. You know, she was born with that. That's not something that actually was taught to her. It was just there. And Natalia, you've spoken of the same thing. Elka, maybe it's been your experience as well. It's just amazing to see these gifts come forth in this amazing way in your children. I know you do the singing too. Yeah, you got your voice. It's just a beautiful thing. So she's going to be bringing this message to a close for me with a song that is called Keep Singing My Song. And it speaks to an aspect of the divine feminine, because I think that this divine feminine has been singing its song since time immemorial, since way back when. And so I want to just acknowledge that is part of why that ancient mother chant that we started with, that was to recognize this energy that's been around, you know, as far as we can remember. And as well, when Natalia suggested the Mother Mary close to me speaking words of wisdom, that was so appropriate, because it speaks to something that's very much in my spiritual DNA, that some of the way Christianity has been presented over the years has left behind. So speaking words of wisdom is so appropriate for this, because if you look through the Bible, if you read through the Old Testament and the New Testament, you know, Jesus brings sort of an egalitarian approach into religion, but prior to that, it's very difficult to find any reference to women that is something that's uplifting, something that's inspiring. One of the exceptions to that is in Proverbs, where there's a speaking of wisdom, and it's very much personified as a woman. And it is such a beautiful and lyrical expression of feminism in the Old Testament that really stands out. It's almost like it got slipped in past the editors. Somehow she just managed to get her voice in there some way. But it's not just, you know, it's something that's so inherent in our culture that we're almost like fish in a fishbowl, that we don't even see it. Because within the Bible, there was an article that was written in the Atlantic Monthly, and what it says that out of all the people who are actually named by name in the Bible, only 111 of them are women. That's out of supposedly 1,426 people are named in the Bible. So women have this very tiny place in biblical history. And in the New Testament, that number is doubled just about, but it's still proportionately very, very small. So being as we're pretty much a Judeo-Christian culture, there's been this underlying lack of recognition of the divine feminine in our spirituality, and very much so even in our culture. So I say this with full recognition that I've been the beneficiary, and our daughters have been the beneficiary of the women's liberation movement and women's feminist consciousness raising that men are seeing women in a different light today, and it's made our lives very, very much different than what they were just even several generations back. But still, my experience of coming into church and listening to messages and listening to the hymns and listening to ministers in my church hopping days before I found Unity was very much one of separation from that God energy. Because I was constantly having to, in my mind, switch from all the references of he to almost changing it to an it in order to be able to have it really speak to my heart. And the thing is, I'm not wanting to talk about men in general. It's this masculine principle. And I think the feminine principle has been somewhat overlooked within men as well. And that's beginning to shift. We're really seeing an awakening of a more feminine bent to our spirituality. But it's just so much that it is. I think what's happening is I'm starting to see places where, even though I thought I had made this shift in being this liberated woman, that there's places where instead of actually being liberated by it, I think I've actually sort of shut myself off to part of what's feminine. Because in order for the feminine to become culturally acceptable, what it really ended up looking like in some places was more masculinity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It just became more and more masculine. And so something got lost along the way. So why would you have to have, like if we, in Unity as we teach that God is genderless. We speak about Father, Mother, God, more as a way of being able to have a symbol that our minds can wrap around. It's very hard to even talk about the absolute. We just don't have the language for it. And if we start saying it, that sounds really impersonal. You know, it takes it out of our heart and our very intimate relationship with the divine. If we say it becomes very clinical. So we practically need to invent new languaging. Maybe that will come. I'm curious to know what it will look like. But even back in the early days of Unity, here we have Myrtle Fillmore, the mother of Unity, she's known as, back late 1800s, early 1900s, and I think that she was a very brave woman to be giving voice to this idea of Father, Mother, God, or Mother, Father, God. She would say Mother, Father, God. And I want to just share with you what she wrote in her healing letters. When someone wrote to her and blessed her for being the mother of Unity, this is what she said. She said, "It's my great joy to perceive somewhat of the mother side of God, the divine love that never fails and that is equal to the drawing of souls to itself. It is my prayer to be able to radiate the qualities of this divine love to all of you. You too are the mother of Unity because in your heart you have the same ideals and the same generous spirit and the endless and tireless service and love that never fails. The mother of Unity is the universal mother. How happy we are to represent this mother." And so I think that she got it. And she would say things like Mother, Father, God in her writings, and then in the very next thing she'd say He, da-da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. So that it was just like the earliest beginnings of being able to recognize the feminine nature of God and do it in a verbal way that came out in prayer work, etc. And so we carry that on to this day. And I think it's important to us as individuals to begin to recognize it. I think it's important to, even the way the world is going, that we begin to recognize it and bring it forward. Even the men, to be able to bring forth that feminine aspect of the divine more and more. Not to the exclusion of the masculine, but in balance with it. So I think the mistake that I made in jumping to my eagerness to embrace God as being spiritual energy, as being love, as being life, and genderless, what I did was I actually kind of took the masculine idea of God that was so embedded within me and in our culture and just kind of went from masculine to not, to genderless. And I don't think it really happens that way because hidden within the itness is the masculine still without its feminine counterpart. So I've been really aware of understanding something intellectually but not fully realizing it. And so I swear, here I am in my 50s and I'm just now realizing the feminine nature of the divine within myself and bringing that into my sense of spirituality. So I had done sort of a spiritual bypass to try to ignore all the masculine references and move to something else that actually jived with me. So part of the process of this awakening in me was every year back in Unity of Corvallis, we would do the treasure mapping process. Have you guys done treasure mapping? And often we use that as a tool for putting our visualization for ourselves in images that we can hold in our subconscious and create and manifest things. But I've also used it as a tool for understanding what is it in my subconscious that's wanting to come forth and be born. You know, what is it that my next year is going to unfold for me that I haven't even consciously recognized yet? And so I want to share with you It came up in the year that I was suddenly realizing I was going to be learning about the divine feminine. So when I started pulling images that spoke to my heart, it wasn't until I began to lay them down on paper that it took form. And so I realized that this year was going to be very much about the divine feminine. And you can see aspects of the feminine archetypes on this board. You're welcome to look at it later on. It's been toted around a bit. But you can see there's the crone energy, there's the kind of princess maiden, there's the divine listening, there's princess and child down here. There's this inner relationship. There's the old Adam and Eve, the dynamics of masculine and feminine at play, and what do they create together. There's a listening, there's an inner relationship, and there's a juiciness, as well as a reverence. So this was something that just was the beginning, and this year unfolded in some very amazing ways, including getting to take part in some Gnostic ritual around Holy Week, which was very much centered on Mary Magdalene. So it had kind of, in a way, excluded much of the masculine and focused almost exclusively on the feminine. But that was almost, I think, necessary to me to be able to shift the dynamic within myself, to be able to incorporate the whole. So I wanted to start with the spiritual aspects of the divine feminine, but then also bring it down into our more human kind of relationships and how does that play out. So when I think about my daughter, and then I think of myself, and I think of my grandparents and their parents and all the way back, I'm very aware that there's been this, just a very beautiful, rich transition over time. And that I still am carrying very much of what existed from my grandmothers and on further down the line. And it's playing forward into my daughter. There's aspects of all of that that are carrying forward in her life. And she has definitely had an impact on carrying forward the feminine in me. There's such an interplay between these generations. I think of those dolls, where you've got the
nesting.
Yeah, the nesting dolls, where you take them apart and there's a doll within a doll within a doll, and you can kind of see it going back through the generations, or coming down into the newest generation, which is the least formed of all the dolls, still waiting to take its place.